So I get a phone call from the lovely Paul Monkman up at DNA, our marketing manager. He said, I've got an idea for a new series for you, Tong. How about, he said, basically, because you can't be asked to write a book, why don't you do a book in a video form? So welcome to the Unwritten Chapters, which is what we're going to call it. So basically what you're going to get for however long this will run, till I've run out of ideas or breath, might be one for a better saying, I'm going to relive all of the captures from all of the circuit waters over the years that I've fished. Some are broad fish, a lot of circuit waters from the UK, places like Horseshoe, Lynch Hill, Linear Fisheries in the early days, Wellington, Monk's Pit, Essex Manor, Mercer's Park, Frimley, loads, and that's before I even go to France. So the options here are endless, and I think it's a really good concept because I can't be bothered to write a book. I haven't got the patience to sit down and put it all into words and type it out. I just haven't got that patience. But this is just a way of getting it across, telling it in a story-based kind of theme, if you like. No plug-in, no nothing, just all about the captures and all about the lakes. So where do I start? There's been so many over the years. So I'm going to try and do ones from years ago before I come more current and come more up to date. So how do I start? Well, it would be rude not to start without going to Linear Fisheries. Now, Linear Fisheries 20 years ago is not the Linear Fisheries that it is today. Obviously, 20 years ago, there was a couple of syndicate lakes and there was 3 day ticket lakes, which was St John's, Manor and Hardwick Smiths. And it's Hardwick Smiths is the one that I targeted. Well, I didn't actually target it. I almost fell upon it, if I'm being honest. So what you've got to picture is I'm from Stoke. There's not a lot of carp fishing in Stoke. There's a lot of part lakes, shallow, weedy, basically just bomb holes. Well, not bomb holes, but very busy with public, and you've got all the associated problems with part lakes. So I made this conscious decision one spring morning. I was sitting on Westport Lake in a swim called Chemical Bay. Loads of people just walking around, sticking red in the brolly. Caught anything, missed, caught anything, missed. You didn't dare go for a pee without the fear of somebody nicking something from your brolly. And I thought, this isn't carp fishing. I was just getting really racked off with the busyness of it. And it was at that time that my carp fishing was a bit stale. I'd come out a very messy kind of past history with drinking and just being a complete idiot. And I thought, the only way to get out of this is just to go fishing further away. So Linear Fisheries was just coming to the forefront of its exposure, if you like. So that's where I thought I would head. So what I would do, I would load the car up at the time and I would just go to Linear. So, I mean, bearing in mind back then, this is 20 years ago, I was completely out my depth. Like I say, I was used to not even bothering with the marker rod because you wouldn't get the float up, it was that weedy. Just chucking and chancing, not a clue what we were doing. So I went to Linear very, very green. And I remember going, the first time I went on to Manor, and I caught quite a few fish up to just under 30 pounds. I mean, you know, 30 pounders these days are still big fish, but you go back 20 years, they were monstrous. They were real big fish, you know. And Manor had some big fish in it, over 40 pounds. It had Popeye and it had Cuttail. So I did my first session then. I really, really enjoyed it. But then I had a little wander around the complex and I went round Hardwick and there was literally nobody on. I was a weekend angler. There was nobody there, and I thought, well, this is strange because there was some lovely fish. We all have seen the old pictures of the scaly fish from Hardwick back in the day, and they were just absolutely biblical. So I sort of went onto the website and I was looking and getting some info if I could. Back then there was no Facebook, nothing like that. It was all forums. So I was trying to get some information on Hardwick, and basically the consensus was it was always quiet because everybody was petrified of the place because it had shallow areas, deep areas. It just become 2 lakes. It was 1 lake. It was 2 lakes that were now cut into 1. So there was now an area, the shallow sort of zone, the fish could go through back into Smiths where, you know, so you weren't necessarily fishing for the fish in that side of the lake. They could have been in the other half. So it just opened up a whole new world of exploration for me. And being totally green, I just thought, well, why not? You know, I wasn't going to fish around Stoke. And I don't know how I felt my way in there. What I liked about the place instantly was the fact it was quiet. It didn't bother me that there was fish up to 40 pound. It didn't bother me about the fact that all the fish were scaly. There wasn't that many fish in. It didn't bother me about the feet. I was just fishing. I was in Oxford, and you know, you've got to go back 20 years to the time where people like Terry Earn were writing. They were fishing the Manor, and people like Ian Chilcott, Dave Lane, Nick Elliott. And all these things were coming to fruition from the Oxford scene, if you like. Things like cutting up flip-flops and fishing zigs and spotting hemp and corn, and you wouldn't have, like now, it's crazy how everybody's gone and they put masses of sweet corn in. And I remember when I used to go onto Hardwick, I would have a green bucket of hemp, the old Elstow green bucket, and those of you that are old enough will remember that, with like literally half a handful of corn to probably 2 kilos of hemp, because you didn't want the kind of fear factor where they looked at it and thought, oh shit, this is just a bed, this is suspicious, it's a bed of yellow and that isn't natural, and they spook. Whereas now, obviously, it's completely different. Everyone's bunging tins and tins of corn in. So don't forget, I wasn't very good at spodding. I was useless at feature finding. I was useless at accuracy. So you can see the mammoth task that I set myself here. So I just went on and went on. You know, I didn't even have braid. I know for a fact I didn't have braid on my spod rod, because I would obviously, sometimes I'd spod behind the marker, so it was just behind, and then have to put, because they're stretching the mono, I'd just have to keep standing to the side to see how far past the float was. You'd leave the float up in them days. Now people don't use floats, do they? It's changed that much. So one of the first areas I went into was called Summer Bay. It was late on in the spring, figuring that it's called Summer Bay, so it must mean that it's predominantly shallow. I mean, ridiculous thoughts these were at the time. So obviously chuck the marker out. I've got braid on the marker. Chuck the marker out, sort of thought, oh, I'll just skip it back, and it's solid and weed. Now, I was literally thrashing the water to a foam for 2 hours trying to find something, but find something I did. And what I found was, if I could get the float up, anywhere left of the spot that I found, it was sort of 18, 17 foot. But then I'd cast on, I mean, I wasn't even feeling the lead down. That's how sort of prehistoric my skills were back then. But if you got it on this one spot, it was 9 foot. And this plateau, it was obviously a plateau, was probably big enough to get 2 rods on. It's well, not world famous, but it's a famous spot now that you can hit off the Summer Bay spit or the point which is in the trees. It's really the Summer Bay spot, I feel. I think it's too far of a chuck from the other side. But obviously this was a plateau. And obviously the fish would, what success I had off that, I would get 2 rods on it, and then I'd have 1 rod on a zig at the side of it, still at the same level, so probably like, it was probably 18, 19 foot, so I'd have a zig about 10 foot, so it was literally just off the plateau, because they were obviously moving across that line. So with the reasoning behind the zig, I'm thinking that obviously if they're feeding on top of the plateau and then just sitting back, they'd have a zig, and I did get plenty of bites on this zig. I mean, this is, again, back in the day where there was no zig aligners or there was no zig foam. We were cutting up bits of cork and bits off his shoe just to make something that was buoyant enough to hold this big zig up, if you like. And again, looking back, that was my first experience with fishing 2 rods on a spot. I know I didn't fish 3 rods on the spot, because back then you literally wanted to, you know, you're shaving the marker float. So the thought of getting, it was always easier to put one either side of the float rather than put one in the bloody middle, because that was obviously the one that you were going to catch. So it was just my first experience of fishing 2 on a spot. And we didn't, like now I ease back on the bait when I start if the conditions are dictating it. But back then we'd think nothing of putting one of these green buckets in, which was probably a couple of kilo wet weight of particle and boilie. And it was predominantly particle. I was using a lot of plastic corn, so a piece of bottom, a piece of sinking, piece of floating just to cock it up, bit of corn in the mix over the hemp, maybe a couple of, the odd tiger nut in there, but it was all predominantly particle based at Linear. Again, I've done my research, and what I quickly discovered, I was fishing with boys like Jon Finch. I got to know Jon Finch very well. Poole, he was on there, Iain Poole, both just fantastic anglers in every sense of the word. They're very, very adaptable, solid bag zigs, surface fishing outstanding. And all this was just, I was sucking all this up like a sponge, and I didn't spend that much time with Poole, but I did spend quite a lot of time with Finchy. And I learned so much off Jon that I can never thank him for enough. Like things like feeling the lead down, how deep or how much swing back do we think there is in 9 foot of water on some of these plateaus. And I started catching fish. Looking back, I was probably a proper royal punisher with Finchy, but he was very obliging, and he's still a friend to this day, you know. But what I realised, and I still don't have a problem saying it, is I'd recognised that there was these 2 guys, and certainly Finchy, were streets ahead of me. So I'm going to make friends with them. I'm going to glean them for as much info as I can possibly get. And that's what happened. And I started to catch quite a lot of fish. So getting onto the one special fish in the one spot that I specifically caught it from, I'd sort of started to investigate around the pit. I mean, Hardwick Smiths is probably 20 acres, but it's, like I say, it's split into 2 halves. Now there's a lot of features in the Smiths side, and there's also a lot of features in the Hardwick side. But for me, the more savage features are in the Smiths side. And again, over the years, there's been lots of filming done that go to back that theory up. So I'd started fishing and I found this spot off the conveyor bank, which was, and my lead kept coming back with clay. Again, now it's like the light bulb moment, isn't it, if you can find clay. It's certainly a mineral early in the spring that they like to feed on or be around or rub on. And I kept finding all this and I just thought, what's all this shit coming back on my lead? But it was a shallow spot. It wasn't gravel and it wasn't rock hard, but it was firm and it was shallower than everything else around it. So I popped the float up. Well, it wasn't super shallow, probably 12s, 13s. And then I walked round onto the Hardwick, or to the conveyor spit, as we used to call it, just to line it up. And it was in line with an old crane, right on the corner of the crane that used to be working the pits, which are now Brasenose, because they were still working those pits back then. And it was a comfortable cast from both swims, but from wind direction, because if you got a big southwesterly, which was when this sort of spot kicked off, the conveyor belt could be pretty uncomfortable and you're pretty high up and it was pretty exposed, so it was just more comfortable on the Hardwick spit. So I put 2 rods on that, and there was a big deep area, sort of big trough that ran to the left into this little deep bay that was on the mouth of the conveyor bank, as I call it. And I've been fishing the clay spot. I used to just call it the clay plateau. It probably wasn't a plateau. It's more just like a big raised area, but not as savage as a steep-sided plateau that I found in Summer Bay. So I didn't have to be as accurate with me casting. So I'd still fish 2. I still wasn't brave enough to fish 3 because we still were popping the marker up. This is before the days of just leading around and using wrapping sticks weren't even invented back then. You know, we didn't even know the concept. So it was all about marker elastic, putting the line in the clip and keep casting and casting and casting until you were sure that with the swing back you were on that spot. I mean, obviously, what it rendered was that you were making that much disturbance at times that you were killing the swim for 6-8 hours, but then the fish would normally drift back in the night at the morning times or the hot times. So this one particular day, the fish were showing, and I'd had a couple of bites off the spot, but then they were really showing a lot over in deep water. Now, I knew it was probably 25 foot to my left in the mouth of this bay, but my instincts were kicking in. I was watching how Finch was doing it, and he would move at the drop of a hat. And I thought, well, I'm almost copying him, if you like. I was just thinking, well, he's the kid, he's doing the business on here. I need to be more like John. So I'd got a couple of rods, and I had little sticks. I used to fish a lot. PVA sticks were very fashionable at the time. And I just chanced it. I didn't know what I was landing on. I'd sort of semi-started to feel the lead down by this stage, which Finchy had shown me. And all I knew was it wasn't gravel, it wasn't hard, it was just a bit of a thud, and I felt like it could probably be weed. But the fish was showing it, and it was a big southwesterly, perfect conditions. So probably about half an hour, I get a bite, and it turns out to be a real old dog-eat scrap. And then I just knew it was a bigger fish. From the fish, I'd probably had quite a lot of upper doubles and low to mid-20s by this stage, but this felt totally different. And I'm playing it in, and when the wind is that strong and it's blowing you off your feet, it's coming from right to left, and you pick the net up and it nearly takes off with you, and I can see it, it's a chunk, and I'm thinking, oh my God, this is massive. I'm thinking it's 70 pound. It would just look that big. And I'm trying to net it, and the more I'm sort of teasing it back and trying to get the net out, the more the wind is catching the mesh, and the more the net is going like that, and the bloody fish is here, and I'm sort of trying to do this, and so eventually it goes in. And it was almost like popping your cherry. It was almost like losing virginity. I knew it was a big fish, and I just knew that everything was starting to fall into place. I was learning, I was trying things, and it was working, like the moving with a couple of rods, just an opportunist chance, if you like. So did the pictures, put it back, and I was kind of buzzing by then. Now the morning's drifted away, and I'm into the afternoon, so I'm back out thrashing my spot to a foam. Didn't put as much bait out this time because I was going in the morning. So you're sort of really fishing at the time. You were fishing for that morning period. Occasionally you get a lucky bite on a zig, or you get an opportunity to sort of move on to the next swim with a couple of rods. But I wasn't as mobile then, whereas Finchy, he'd be baiting spots in the edge, and he'd always have something to go on throughout the day. His work rate was fantastic, whereas I was quite happy to just, look, I'll try a few new things, because I was a very stationary angler back then. I wasn't really mobile. I'll try these few new things, and I'll keep building my skill set until I've reached the stage where I think I'll be. So I baited up again, I got the rigs out, nothing happened in the night, and then I started to get liners probably about 5-6 o'clock-ish in the morning. and then a real slow take. And I used to use these big, heavy MCF bobbins. They were on chains, and like you kind of think, however did I get a line bite back then? Because I don't know how I don't know how a 30-pounder could actually pull the bobbin up when it ran. It was that heavy, this bobbin one, with the chain. So I started to get a few lifts on this bobbin, and I'm thinking they're obviously here. Slicks started to come off the hemp, and they get a bite. And it felt exactly the same as the 32-pounder, as I'm playing it. And then it's all gone solid. And I thought, there's no weed there. And what it obviously done, big sheets of cloudy water kept coming up then. And it's obviously, I hadn't really explored this spot that greatly, because I didn't really have the ability to do so. I didn't really know all I knew was if I put it to the left with the braid, I'd pull back, and I'd feel it hitting the clay, if you like, and it was getting a bit sticky, and then it'd lock up, and then you'd really have to pull it to get it out. And obviously I didn't even think anything of it. I thought a brick or something. Obviously now I know that some of the faces behind this feature were like this, really steep, and it was clay. So all I was doing, the braid is cutting into the clay almost like a piece of wire going through cheese, and pulling my float just basically into thick clay, and no wonder I couldn't get it up. And I could only presume that this fish has just kited left on the bite and just locked me up behind this clay. I'm like, shit. And then I start seeing loads of masses of like dirty water coming up. It looked like silt. And then it started moving again. So obviously what's happened is the fish has started to move, and it's pulled all the mono and the lead core and everything through the clay, which is what's kicking all the crap up. The lead's come off, I can clearly see that, because the fish is on the surface. He's probably now 60 yards out. And I could even see the scales from then. I didn't know what fish it was, but then as it came closer, I thought, it had been named Jordan, this fish, because it was a big, heavily plated, almost fully scaled mirror, but it got a massive stomach, and it was really pushed up front. So I think it was called Jordan because obviously Jordan, the woman, Katie Price, who's got the massive titties, and obviously they kind of pushed up quite high, so Jordan was quite a fitting, kind of doing that a bit more, a fitting name. And then as it come close, I thought, no, it can't be. And I kind of just, when you doubt your ability, you think, I'm not good enough to catch a fish like that. But then I thought, well, hold on, I caught a 32-pounder the day before with rods lying on the deck using the stick. And I knew it was then, as it come closer. And then I can see Roy Parsons. This was back in the day when Roy used to bailiff, and I could see his truck coming across the conveyor track. And he obviously could see I've got a fisher, so he's come around. Now, Roy isn't sympathetic at all. He's a pike angler, he knows nothing about carp fishing. So as I'm playing, he's walked in this way, he went, oh, that's Jordan then. I went, oh my God. And I knew it was a big fish. So he's got the net, and we've played, and it's sort of tussling around. The margins are really deep on the Hardwick side. It was just chugging away for age. And then, you just think any minute it's going to come off, it's going to come off, it's going to come off. But it didn't. It come up, Parsons, straight in the net. Load of swear words, load of abuse. First thing he tells me to do is put the kettle on. So we couldn't weigh nothing. And what the worrying thing was with Roy is when he used to weigh a fish for you, he used to take his glasses off to read the scales. So you kind of think, is he right? Is he just make them up? So we had a brew. Fish calmed down a bit, got the rig out of everything. It's obviously Jordan. He put it on the scales. I'm holding it up, and he's taking his glasses off. He's done that. And he said, what's your PB? Well, my PB was the 32-pounder the day before. When you fish your park lakes up north and around Stoke and Cheshire, and there ain't nothing that size. Well, there wasn't back then, there is now. And I said, well, it was a 32 from yesterday, Roy. And Roy didn't know I'd had a 32-pounder. So he went, well, it's not 32 anymore, it's 35 and a half. And there she was, and that was Jordan. I can't begin, it was getting really warm, and I used to take a few tinnies with me there, a few drinks. And I didn't recast the rod because I'd still got one out there. I was going in a couple of hours. So I got one tin of Carlin. That proves what a northerner I am. I was drinking Carlin, which is the absolute epitome of poor man's lager. And I just had a little drink. It was only probably about 8 o'clock in the morning. And I let it all sink in. And I think I look at my carp fishing over the years when I've drifted in and out of it, I've driven back into it, and then I've drifted out of it for whatever reason. And I think that was when I came of age as a carp angler, because that's when I used to follow all the time. From my younger days when I started in the mid-80s, I would always follow trends. So if somebody wrote about a rig or a bait, I would use it for that reason. I didn't understand why I was using it. I was just using it because Tim Paisley was writing about it, or Julian Cundiff, or whoever was writing prolifically at the time. And the same with bait, it would all be ready-mades, for example, because I didn't really know anything about bait and how to roll it. So I was always following, but this was the time I felt I'd come of age. I was making the effort to drive from Stoke for 2.5 hours to get to Linear, which people weren't doing that back in the day. There was only a handful of people that were travelling. And I always think that when Northerners travel south, when you fished shitty, horrible, muddy park lakes and really silty, deep meres where there's no real features to find, just the odd harder area, and you go down and you find these gravel pits and you find these spots, and I just think it makes you try a lot better. And I'm not saying that I think northern anglers are better than southern anglers, because they're not. I just think that the effort and what they discover on these gravel pits, it almost fascinates them because they're not used to seeing it on the waters they've been brought up on. And that was definitely my case, and it was there where I just felt like I was growing as a carp angler. I was understanding why I was doing things, not just because Finchy was telling me to use this rig or put this on, or he would get this braid because there's no stretch. He was explaining things why, and then obviously then he'd be like, well, why are you spodding with mono when there's a stretch in it? Things like that. And then as soon as you start spodding with braid, the penny falls, and you think, well, how have I ever spodded without it? And it's your brain kicking in. It's the learning process. So you're not just copying things for a reason. You're taking things on board and you're putting them into practice because you understand them, and then they work. And it was pushing me forward to just get more and more knowledge. I was just soaking everything up, and it was just fantastic sort of hallucinate times, if that's the word I'm looking for. But I still, Jordan was my PB for a long time after that. And I guess the saying goes that you can only catch what swims around in front of you. And it was only when I pushed onto other waters with bigger fish in that I bettered that PB. But I was sad to see it go as my PB, because it's such a character, not just the name, but the scale pattern, the shape of the fish, the frame of the fish, its looks, just everything about it was just one of those classic Oxland carp, if you like. And I was very pleased to make its acquaintance.